If you love heart-touching survival stories, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts below. Your support keeps these miracles alive. The wind screamed like a forgotten spirit across the vast, white emptiness of the Arctic. It wasn't just cold. It was a kind of cold that felt alive, creeping under the skin, biting to the fur, and whispering quiet threats of death with every gust. The ice cracked faintly beneath the weight of nothing, just the shifting of the earth. Maybe it was warning that time was running out. In that frozen silence, broken only by the whine of wind and distant groans of shifting glaciers, a tiny figure huddled beside a jagged mound of snow. She was barely moving. A polar bear cub, no bigger than a golden retriever, curled into herself, shivering so hard her tiny paws scraped lines in the snow beneath her. Her fur, once white and fluffy, was matted with frost. Ice clung to her whiskers. Her breath was shallow, faint, each inhale a quiet struggle against the cold world that was trying to erase her. She didn't even have the strength to cry. No mother, no warmth, just emptiness. They say polar bear cubs can survive in brutal temperatures if they're with their mother. But this little one, she was alone, completely alone. Her eyes blinked slowly, dry from the freezing wind. She tried to stand once, her legs trembling under her tiny body. She collapsed. She didn't try again. The storm had been roaring for nearly 2 days. No shelter, no food, no movement. Her stomach was empty, aching in that deep, hollow way that feels like burning from the inside. Her muscles were weak. Her heartbeat, slowing. There was a time, maybe only a day ago, when she still cried out, faint yelps that vanished into the snow, hoping someone might hear, hoping her mother was just around the next drift. But now, there were no more calls, no more sound, just a silent, shivering shadow on the ice. And yet, something deep inside her still fought, a tiny flicker of life, fragile but real, the kind of flame that doesn't roar, but refuses to die. She lay there, breathing slow and shallow, hoping, or maybe just existing. Far in the distance, the sky turned a strange shade of silver blue. A storm cloud twisted above, swirling like a giant bruise in the sky. Snowflakes fell sideways now, slicing through the air like knives. The cold turned sharper, meaner. She didn't flinch. She had no energy left to react. The land around her was endless and merciless. Flat, white nothingness with only distant shapes of icebergs breaking the horizon. No food, no tracks, no scent, nothing to lead her home, if she even had a home anymore. No one knows how she got separated. Maybe her mother had gone out to hunt and never returned. Maybe a predator chased them, and in the panic, she was left behind. Or maybe the ice cracked suddenly beneath their den, tearing them apart. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. A baby, still too young to know how to find food, too small to fend off danger, was alone in the most brutal wilderness on Earth. And she was dying. But just before the snow swallowed the last of the daylight, something changed. A sound, not the usual howling of wind or creaking of ice. No, this was different. Rhythmic, faint at first, then clearer. Footsteps, not the soft pads of another animal. These were heavy, deliberate, crunching across the snow with slow determination. The cub didn't move. She couldn't, but her ears twitched. She heard it. Somewhere in the frozen fog of her fading world, something was coming. From behind a ridge, a figure emerged, tall, bundled in thick layers, face nearly covered, only the eyes visible behind frosted goggles. A sled pulled behind. Slowly, carefully, they moved through the snow, scanning the ice with practiced caution. They weren't here by accident. They were searching for something. The wind howled louder, as if protesting the intruder. But the figure kept walking. They had trained for storms like this. They had seen the cruelty of the Arctic before. But nothing could prepare them for what they were about to find. They stopped suddenly. At first, they thought it was a clump of snow, maybe drifted ice. But then they saw it, a twitch, a small movement, just enough. The rescuer moved closer, heart thudding in their chest. And then they saw her. The cub lay there, barely breathing. her eyes half closed, her tiny body rising and falling in painful, shallow breaths. For a moment, everything froze. Even the wind seemed to pause. A baby, alone, starving, dying. The rescuer knelt, inches away. A gloved hand reached out slowly, cautiously. They knew not to startle her, but she didn't even react. The rescuer's breath caught. "She's still alive," they whispered to no one but the wind. The cub's eyes fluttered. Just barely. There was someone here. Something warm. Something alive. For the first time in 2 days, she felt a presence. A whisper of hope. The rescuer knew what had to be done. The storm was growing worse. The sled had barely enough supplies. They weren't supposed to be this far out. But this couldn't be ignored. This was a life. Without another word, the rescuer slid off their pack, gently lifted the frail, frozen cub into a thick, wool-lined blanket. She didn't resist, didn't fight, just sighed, barely audible, and sank into the warmth. And just like that, 2 souls, one human, one barely clinging to life, became part of a story that would change them both. But this was only the beginning, because what lay ahead would test every ounce of strength, courage, and faith they had left. The storm was not letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. Thick flurries of snow now whipped sideways across the frozen landscape, blurring the line between sky and land. The wind howled louder, angrier, like it was trying to chase them both off the face of the earth. The rescuer's boots crunched deeper into the snow, each step more labored than the last, as visibility dropped to just a few feet ahead. The cub, wrapped tightly inside the wool blanket and pressed to the rescuer's chest, made no sound. No cries. No shivers. No movement. That silence was terrifying. Inside the rescuer's chest, a lump formed. Their heart beat fast, not just from the exertion of dragging the sled through knee-deep snow, but from fear. The kind of fear you can't shake, even if you don't speak it out loud. "Stay with me, little one," they whispered through frozen lips, their voice muffled by the scarf covering their face. "Just hang on." But minutes were beginning to feel like hours. Every second counted now. The human had radioed in hours ago, before the storm hit full force. A short message. "Found something. Might need emergency evac. Will update." But the radio had since gone silent. The storm cut off signals like scissors through string. There would be no help coming until the skies cleared, and no one knew when that would be. The sled, loaded with survival gear, food, and medical supplies, creaked behind them. The rope pulled tight across the rescuer's shoulder, biting into the thick jacket as they trudged forward. Each breath formed a cloud that instantly froze and clung to their lashes. They couldn't stop. Not here. Not now. The cub's body felt lighter than it should have. That wasn't a good sign. Cubs at that age were supposed to be plump, fluffy, with enough baby fat to protect them against the cold. But this one, this little survivor, was bones and frost. Her fur clung close to her body, thin by days without warmth, her belly sunken in from hunger. There was a distant cracking sound, sharp and sudden. The rescuer froze mid-step. Cracks in the ice. They knew the sound too well. It echoed differently than other noises, hollow, haunting, like the earth itself was warning you. You shouldn't be here. They scanned the landscape, quickly. No obvious signs yet, but the snow was deep. Ice could break beneath them without warning. And with a storm howling above and below, no one would even know they were gone. Still, they moved on. They had to. With every step, the rescuer checked the cub's tiny face. Eyes closed, nostrils flaring ever so slightly. She was still breathing, but faintly. So faint it felt like watching a candle flicker in the wind. They had fed her a drop of rehydration fluid earlier, 1 drop at a time. But it wasn't enough. Her body needed warmth, fuel, shelter. She needed her mother. The thought stabbed through the rescuer's heart like a spike of ice. Where was her mother? Were there paw prints nearby, buried under fresh snow? Had she been taken by a predator? Died in the storm? Or was she still searching, out there somewhere, desperate to find her baby? But there was no time to dwell. Suddenly, a sharp gust of wind lifted a cloud of snow off the surface. Blinding, furious. The rescuer dropped to their knees, shielding the cub with their body. The wind cut like knives across their back. Ice stung the skin where their scarf had slipped. They stayed like that, crouched and trembling, until the worst passed. Then came a sound they didn't expect. A growl, low, guttural, too close. The rescuers' breath caught in their throat. They turned, slowly, just a dozen yards behind them, through the swirling snow movement. A shadow, then two, then glowing eyes. Wolves. The Arctic wolves had been following them, silently, patiently, waiting. The scent of the cub, faint but still present, must have drawn them in. Hunger made them brave. Desperation made them bold. The rescuers' pulse pounded in their ears. They stood tall, arms wide, yelling out into the snow. H-E-Y, go, get out of here. Their voice cracked through the storm, echoing for just a moment, but the wolves didn't run. They stood their ground, watching, calculating. One step forward, then another. The rescuer reached for the flare strapped to their belt, hand trembling. They only had two, and the second might be needed later for rescue, but there was no choice. With a sharp snap and a hiss, the flare roared to life, blazing red lights slicing through the white storm like fire in a blizzard. The wolves flinched, growled, then slowly began to back away. The rescuer didn't move until they were gone. Only then, breathing raggedly, they turned back toward the direction of the outpost, a shelter marked on their map just over 3 miles away. If they could reach it, they might have a chance. But the storm had erased their path. Landmarks were gone. Everything was shifting, changing. And behind them, the ice creaked again, this time closer. They moved fast now, dragging the sled, clutching the cub close, each step a prayer, each second a gamble. The cub stirred once, barely. A tiny twitch. Maybe a dream. Maybe something deeper. The rescuer whispered again, "Hold on, little one. Don't you give up on me." But inside, they didn't know if it was already too late. The storm was rising, the cold closing in, and the Arctic was far from done testing them. The Arctic didn't sleep. Even as night fell, if you could call it an eternal twilight of the polar zone, the storm pressed on, slower now, but colder, quieter, but more dangerous. The kind of silence that felt like it was watching. The rescuer spotted the faint outline of the outpost shelter, just past a jagged ridge of wind-swept snow. A miracle in the white nothingness. The small wooden cabin, half buried in frost, its roof sagging with the weight of snow, stood like a forgotten relic of humanity in a world ruled by ice. It wasn't much, but it was hope. With legs trembling from exhaustion, the rescuer climbed the final slope, dragging the sled behind them, their muscles screaming with every inch. The cub, still wrapped in layers of wool and emergency thermal foil, didn't stir. The door of the cabin groaned open, was stiff with ice. Inside, darkness, dust, and silence. But the walls held, and that was enough. The rescuer moved fast. They had to. The temperature inside was still below freezing. They grabbed the emergency heat pack, cracked it open, and placed it beneath the bundle where the cub lay. Then came layers, blankets, towels, anything to trap what little warmth they could generate. Next, a tiny dropper. Liquid electrolytes, barely a few drops, gently pressed to the edge of the cub's lips. And then a pause. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, barely visible, her tongue flicked. Just once, but it was enough to make the rescuer's chest ache. "She's fighting," they whispered, crouched beside her. "You're fighting. Good girl." They stayed like that for hours, checking her breathing every few minutes, rubbing her tiny paws to keep circulation going, holding her close, wrapped in a coat against their chest, whispering soft words through chattering teeth. "You're not alone anymore," they said. Not anymore. At some point, the rescuer dozed off, head resting against the log wall of the cabin, arms still wrapped around the fragile cub. They had intended to fall asleep, but fatigue always finds a way. What woke them wasn't sound, but movement. The cub stirred. For the first time since they'd found her, she shifted on her own. It was small, just a nuzzle of her face into the rescuer's chest, a weak attempt at seeking warmth. But it was enough. The rescuer looked down, heart catching in their throat. Two dark eyes were open, foggy, unfocused, but open, and for a long, frozen second, the cub stared right into theirs. That was the moment. There was no growl, no fear, just a fragile, breathless kind of understanding. Like somewhere deep in the cub's tiny heart, she recognized that this warm shape holding her wasn't a threat, wasn't danger. It was safety. She blinked slowly, then let her head rest again, eyes closing. The rescuer didn't say a word. Tears welled silently behind tired eyes, and one rolled down their cheek, tracing a clean path through the dirt and frost on their skin. This was what it meant to be alive, to witness something return from the edge, to know, even in a world this cold, that connection could still exist. They named her Nanook. It meant polar bear in the Inuit tongue. But it wasn't just a name. It was a prayer. Days passed inside the cabin. The storm outside had grown weaker, but still raged in spurts. The radio flickered in and out. Supplies ran low. But inside, something was changing. The cub was healing. Slowly, painfully, inch by inch. She drank more each day, ate small amounts of soaked kibble and fish from the emergency rations. She began to lift her head, then to sit up. Once, she even let out a soft noise, a tiny, rasping grunt that brought laughter to the rescuer's cracked lips. They cleaned her fur gently with a damp cloth, removing the crusted ice and blood. They treated the minor wounds on her paws with balm. They held her for hours, whispering stories, songs, anything to keep her calm. And through it all, she watched them. Her eyes, once glazed and distant, now followed the rescuer's every move. Cautious at first, curious later, and finally, trusting. One night, as the wind howled outside and the cabin creaked like an old ship in a storm, the cub crept, just barely, toward the rescuer's side. She placed one paw on their leg and nestled in close, her body curling into the warmth. The rescuer didn't move. They just placed a hand softly on her back. It was the first time either of them had slept soundly in days. In those quiet hours, the rescuer found themselves wondering why this cub. Why now? They had rescued animals before, seen things most people wouldn't believe. But this was different. Maybe it was the way she had held on when everything told her to let go. Maybe it was the way she had stared into their soul with those silent eyes. Or maybe it was because in saving her, they had somehow saved a part of themselves. Because in the deepest part of their heart, the rescuer knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about connection. And something far more powerful was forming between them. But the Arctic wasn't done with them yet. Because the next morning, just as the skies began to clear, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. A roar. Not one of hunger, not one of warning, but of heartbreak. Somewhere out on the ice, a mother was searching. At first, the roar had sounded distant, faint, carried on the wind like a ghost of something ancient. The rescuer had thought it was just their imagination, a trick of exhaustion, the wind toying with their mind. But then it came again, louder, closer. It was not the sound of a predator. It was the sound of a mother. The rescuer stood motionless at the cabin doorway, heart pounding beneath the layers of thermal clothing. Snow drifted around their boots. The air was sharp and brittle. But none of that mattered. They knew that sound. A polar bear. And not just any one. This one was grieving. Somewhere out there in the white expanse was a mother who had lost everything. A mother who had cried into the wind, hoping the snow would carry her voice far enough. A mother who, by some miracle, had made it through the same storm. Looking, searching, calling. The rescuer turned back inside. Nanook was asleep on the folded coat by the fire, her body still thin, but her breathing stronger now. Each rise and fall of her tiny chest was a victory, but also a ticking clock. What would happen if her mother found them? Would she attack? Would she even recognize her cub? Would it already be too late? The rescuer sat beside Nanook, resting a hand gently on her back. Her fur was warmer now. She stirred at the touch, blinking slowly, eyes still full of quiet trust. "You hear that, little one?" they whispered. "I think she's calling for you." But there was no answer, only the wind and the distant sound of heavy paws moving across the ice. That night was not restful. Every creak outside made the rescuer flinch. Every howl in the wind made them hold the flare a little tighter. But the mother never came close. And the next morning, Nanook didn't just sit up, she stood. Wobbly, awkward, her paws slid slightly on the wood floor. But she stood. On her own. It was the first time the rescuer had truly cried. They laughed through the tears, dropping to their knees beside her. You did it. You're strong. The cub leaned into their chest, just for a moment, then looked toward the door. And that was when the rescuer realized something that twisted their heart. She heard her. She knew. Her mother was out there. The rescuer stepped outside, scanning the horizon. The storm had passed, but the air was still thick with tension. Then movement. A massive shadow emerged near the frozen ridge where the sled tracks disappeared. Large, powerful, pure white, but scarred, an old wound down one side of her face. She moved with purpose, her nose low to the ground, following a scent, following her scent. The rescuer's heart felt like it stopped. Nanook let out a noise behind them, soft and unsure, a tiny whimper, and in the distance, the mother froze. Her ears perked, her head lifted. Then she roared again. But this time, it wasn't a cry of grief. It was a cry of hope. The rescuer dropped to one knee, arms protectively around the cub. Easy, they whispered. Let her come. The mother bear moved slowly, cautiously. Her massive body cut a deep trail through the snow, eyes locked on the small figure behind the human. She paused just 20 feet away. Then 10. The air was electric. One wrong move could mean disaster. But the rescuer didn't move. They just lowered their arms and stepped aside. Slowly, Nanook took a step forward. Then another. She stopped halfway, unsure. The mother chuffed softly, a sound that wasn't threatening but coaxing, a sound that only another bear would understand. And Nanook ran. Her tiny legs churned through the snow. The moment she reached her mother, the big bear lowered her head, gently nudging her cub against her chest with a massive paw. The two collapsed into each other, a reunion carved out of snow and silence. The mother licked her cub from head to tail, letting out deep, guttural purrs that rumbled to the cold air like thunder softened by love. The rescuer watched, unable to stop the tears. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, because even in that moment of reunion, a choice had to be made. The mother bear looked up. Their eyes met, and in that frozen second, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, trust, respect, but also warning. Because this reunion had happened in the borderlands of safety. Any closer, and instinct could take over. Nanook was her cub, but humans were still a threat. The rescuer backed away slowly, one step at a time, until they reached the edge of the shelter. They didn't look away. They couldn't. But then the ice cracked. A loud, tearing sound just beyond the ridge. The weight of the two bears had shifted the balance of the ice shelf. It was collapsing. And oh! The rescuer shouted. Without thinking, they sprinted forward. The mother bear turned, eyes wide with panic, as the ground beneath them shifted. A massive fracture split the ice between her and solid land. Nanook, small and slow, was falling behind. The rescuer lunged, grabbing the cub just before the edge gave way, sliding on their stomach, snow burning against their chest. Then a roar. The mother was there, teeth bared, not in anger, but fear. She grabbed her cub's scruff in her mouth as the rescuers shoved Nanook forward, pushing with all their strength. The cub tumbled into her mother's chest. Safe, but the edge broke. The rescuer felt their grip slip, and then nothing but cold. The freezing water wrapped around their body like death. Shock took hold instantly. Pain, like knives through every vein. They couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. But a moment later, something yanked them up. A rope, the sled rope. It had tangled around their wrist. And with a final surge, they grabbed the edge of the broken shelf and dragged themselves up, gasping, trembling, soaked. Alive. They looked up, expecting the bears to be gone. But they weren't. The mother stood there, still, watching. Then she nodded, just once, and walked away into the snow, her cub nestled safely beneath her. The rescuer collapsed into the snowbank, exhausted, frozen, but smiling, because against every odd life had found a way. The sky had softened. Where once it screamed with blizzard winds and clouds torn in fury, now it exhaled peace. A quiet hush spread across the frozen world, like nature itself had paused to witness what had just happened. The rescuer lay still for a long time, half-soaked, shivering, heart still pounding from the fall, the rescue, the weight of everything. But even through the aching cold, a smile had found its way to their lips. They were alive, and more importantly, so was she. The mother and cub had vanished into horizon now, two white silhouettes against the white world. But their tracks remained, a winding, messy path pressed into the snow, proof that love had led them home. Back inside the cabin, the heat from the small emergency stove flickered against the walls. The rescuer sat wrapped in thick blankets, hands shaking slightly as they sipped hot water with a pinch of lemon powder. It burned going down, but it reminded them that they were still here, still human, still capable of kindness. They looked toward the door, where she had stood, where those dark eyes, tiny but brave, had stared up into theirs, and a part of them missed her already. It was strange, they thought, how something so small, so silent, could leave such a loud echo inside your soul. They didn't even know how many days had passed since they found her. The storm had blurred time, erased the lines between day and night. But none of it mattered. What mattered was that somewhere out there, beneath the vast Arctic sky, a mother was holding her cub again, and the world was just a little brighter because of it. When the rescue team finally arrived, 4 days later, they didn't believe the story at first. The cracked ice, the fallen shelf, the polar bear mother appearing out of nowhere, the cub, the near drowning. But when they saw the paw prints, the small ones beside the large, stretching out from the cabin toward the wilderness, they believed. One of the medics, a woman named Eliza, crouched beside the rescuer as they were lifted onto the snow stretcher. "You saved her," she whispered. "You actually saved her." The rescuers shook their head. "No," they said, "she saved me." Back at base, the news traveled fast. An orphan polar bear cub, rescued by a lone wildlife responder during the worst storm in years, reunited with her mother in a last-minute miracle that defied logic, science, and probability. The story touched hearts around the world. Thousands of people wrote in. Letters, emails, messages from strangers who said they cried, said they needed to believe in something again, said this story reminded them that even in the coldest places, warmth can be found. But beyond the headlines, something else began to rise. A quiet, persistent truth. That Nanook story wasn't just about one cub, one rescue. It was about all of them. Because the Arctic was changing, and fast. Where there was once thick ice, now there was slush. Where mothers once raised their cubs in safety, now there were storms and starvation. And where hope once came easy, now it had to be fought for. But even in that fight, there was beauty, because of people like the rescuer, because of hearts that didn't turn away, because of hands that reached into the cold instead of pulling back. In the weeks that followed, a photo went viral. A drone had captured it just after the rescue. The image, a fragile cub, looking back from beside her towering mother, one final glance at the human figure in the snow. 2 worlds, 1 moment, a bond that defied everything. Beneath the image, someone wrote, one tiny heartbeat against a vast, melting world. It became a rallying cry, a symbol, a reminder that compassion matters, not just in words, but in action, not just in good times, but when the ice cracks, when the storm comes, when no one else is watching. The rescuer never forgot her. Sometimes on quiet nights, they would look at the northern sky and imagine her there, older now, stronger, walking beside her mother across the glittering ice, chasing snowflakes, learning to hunt, watching the aurora ripple across the stars. A miracle still moving, but they also knew the truth, that for every Nanook, there were others who wouldn't be so lucky, cubs who wouldn't be found in time. mothers who wouldn't survive the storms, ice shelves that would vanish before they could bear weight again. That truth weighed heavy, but it also lit a fire. The rescuer began speaking, sharing, telling the story not just as a memory, but as a call to care, to act, to protect what's still left before it's too late. They showed the footage, the photos, the rescue journal, weather-battered and smudged with melted snow. They held up Nanook's tiny paw print, pressed into a piece of cardboard from the cabin floor. And they told people, this is real. This matters. She mattered. And you can help write the next ending. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not just that one fragile cub survived, but that her survival sparked a wave of love, change, and courage across a world that had grown numb. Because even now, as glaciers grow and oceans rise, even now, as time melts like ice beneath our feet, one story can still thaw 1,000 hearts. And one act of kindness can light the dark. Speech balloon, but for thousands like them, time is melting away with the ice. The wind had died down and the world had become still. It was quiet in a way that only the Arctic could understand. The silence of a place where life and death are woven so tightly together that no sound could ever feel pure, except, perhaps, the sound of survival. And in the stillness, the rescuers sat by the fire, their fingers gently tracing the edge of a weathered map. They had spent the last few months traveling to schools, sharing Nanook's story, spreading the word about climate change, about hope, about the need to protect the fragile ecosystems that were home to animals like her. The story had touched people's hearts. Parents had written letters, tears staining their pages as they told how the story reminded them to cherish their families, to never give up. Some spoke of their own struggles, how Nanook's fight had mirrored their own battles in life, and others simply said they had never felt so deeply for something beyond themselves. But it wasn't just about the story anymore. It was about a shift, a change in the air, the idea that maybe, just maybe, this time, people would listen. And yet, still, the rescuer could not help but feel a quiet sadness linger inside, a reminder that for every Nanook saved, countless others remained, their stories untold, their struggles hidden beneath the melting ice and rising tides. Some days, it felt as if time was running out. The ice was shrinking. The seasons were changing too quickly. And the bears? Well, they were still waiting for us to act. As the rescuers stood at the door, looking out over the endless snowy expanse, they saw the faintest shadow in the distance. A mother bear, moving slowly, her cub trailing just behind. They were free. But how many more would ever get this chance? How many would fall through the cracks before they were found? The rescuer closed their eyes for a moment. The wind stung their face, but it didn't matter. It was a last reminder of something. A call. A message that was clear and heavy as stone. We must change now. And then the thought came, not of the mother bear or the cub, not of the wild, distant places where polar bears roam, but of those who had watched, who had heard this story, who had opened their hearts just for a few minutes. The viewers who had become part of something greater, who were no longer just passive observers, but active participants in something that could change the world. It was the power of stories, of love, of sacrifice, of survival. It was a realization that the world was full of ordinary people who could do extraordinary things if only they understood the need, if only they cared enough to make a difference. The rescuer's hand gently held the worn photo of Nanook and her mother, that final image, captured in time, when the cub had turned back to glance one last time before walking into the unknown with her mother. One tiny heartbeat against a vast, melting world. It felt like a prayer that we would wake up before it was too late. A prayer that every bear, every creature, every wild heart would have a chance to live, to survive, to grow. And that prayer was simple. The world still is time, if we choose it. There was a moment of peace in the cabin. The warmth of the fire, the soft glow of the hearth against the walls, the flicker of shadows, as if the ghosts of the Arctic had come to watch, silent and solemn. The rescuer had always known that their life would change when they took that first step into the wilderness, that it would be different after Nanook, that nothing would ever be quite the same again. But what they hadn't known, what they had never imagined, was how much we would change, how much everyone could change. As they walked outside, the cold took their breath away. But now they didn't mind. The world was waking up, one story at a time, one tiny heartbeat. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the ice. And as the rescuer looked up into the deepening sky, they heard a sound, a whisper on the wind. It was faint, but it was there, a cry. And this time, it wasn't just the wind. It was the hope of a world that had decided to act before it was too late. A world that still had time. In a world growing colder, one act of kindness still burns bright. The video had ended, but the message had just begun. Please share Nanook's story. Let's make sure her story is heard. Let's make sure we don't forget the world that gave us everything to begin with. Share their story. Become a voice for the voiceless.